Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. We are going to be learning together about measurement and evaluation over the next couple of weeks. And before I get too much into an introduction over the topic, I would really like to just start by hearing from you all. When I say the words measurement and evaluation, what specifically comes to mind?
I think of stats and spreadsheets and measuring tapes and
Okay, that's good. I agree. Those
yeah.
are good images. What else?
Meetings.
Okay.
Meetings, yeah.
Yeah, meetings. Okay. Is measurement and evaluation something that you all feel like you're quite familiar with, or something that you're already practicing in the ministry or work that you are doing?
I don't have
No.
an intentional process, but I feel like I'm gifted at seeing what needs to change and how we can make an adjustment
Okay, I like that.
and
I
pursue
agree with Jonathan.
steps.
I was about to say the same thing. We don't have one specific way of, going through either measurement or evaluation, but I think we do it in our own way, I guess.
Sure. Yep. Yep. So you're always kind of in a posture of learning, studying what you're doing, thinking about whether it's working or not, seeking wisdom or maybe counsel from others, and then applying some of those things to help make your efforts more effective in the future. Is that right? Awesome.
Definitely, yes.
That's great. I love that. Well, let's jump into some of the kind of more technical definitions of what measurement evaluation is and why at least I think it matters. We'll see if you all think the same by the time we're done with the course. So performance measurement involves collecting and reporting data. So that's those spreadsheets that you all were conjuring that can be used to summarize and assess the way a program is being implemented. It's intended to generate information that a nonprofit or a ministry, or even a business really, can use to improve their programs. And it's a process that's often described by the phrase continuous improvement. So if you've heard of CQ cycles, like continuous improvement cycles, that's how we apply the learning that comes from the process of measuring and evaluating. And it makes us better over time, or at least it's intended to. So why do we do measurement and evaluation? Why might it be important? So before you read what's at the bottom of my screen here, just talk to me a little bit from your own perspective of why might it be important to engage a process of measurement and evaluation on behalf of our ministry?
I think it's definitely important just to just so we can see if we're going in the right direction, or we need to, take a break, or we need to, we need to make changes in whatever God is calling us to do.
Absolutely. I love that. That's a great reason why we might want to engage in this process. What else?
I like to think of our work, or anyone's work, no matter what they do, as kind of like a puzzle. Let's say it's like a 500-piece puzzle. And when you're in it, you're so focused on like maybe 10 or 20 pieces. And so I feel like doing measurement and evaluation, you can pull back and get the whole view and scope of what's happening and look more intentionally to help make everything be smoother, be able to grow.
Love that. I love that. Yeah, you get to see the forest through the trees a little bit by zooming out to that kind of 30,000 foot view. And then instead of only focusing so myopically on one or two pieces that have required a lot of your attention or energy, maybe in the last season, you can actually look at how the whole machine is actually functioning, and if there are places where it needs to be strengthened or adjusted in order to perform in a more smooth way or achieve better impact over time. That's great, Jonathan. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was thinking too of just accountability for our supporting supporters and that aspect, but then also just the it's easy to get wrapped up in one aspect of the ministry and or work, and just being able to see the big picture, like Jonathan was saying.
Absolutely. Yes. Accountability is a huge component of it. Jeremiah, you're absolutely right. And as the slide suggests, nonprofits, whether they are secular or ministry focused, are being really asked to be more accountable as time goes on. And they're expected to back up the claims of what they're doing in the field with actual data and evidence that shows that they are using donor funds in a way that is responsible or in alignment with how the actual contributor intended, and that they're seeing positive results, and it doesn't mean that all of our results need to be positive. As you all have already suggested, a lot of times when we notice from doing a process of evaluation that something isn't quite meeting the mark or going in the way that we thought it would, or achieving the level of impact that's desired, it allows us to adjust and to learn and to make changes so that in the future we really can designate resources into the areas where they're most effective and where they really are producing kind of the impacts that we are hoping for. As it's related to foundations or grantors, these kind of funding mechanisms are incorporating an array of approaches to assessing any kind of grant making performance. So for organizations that we work with that might be eligible or might desire to apply for foundation funding, they not only have to be able to demonstrate that they're already making a positive impact in the world in alignment with their mission by supplying data as a part of most grant applications. They also have to indicate in a number of those applications how they're going to measure the impact or the outcomes of the program that's being funded by that grantor. And so it's another component if we want to open up that type of funding for ourselves or for our ministry partners or people we work with, that they understand a process of measurement and evaluation and how it contributes to their fundraising efforts. So there's two frameworks here that we need to discuss. I think oftentimes when we talk about measurement and evaluation, it gets lumped together into two letters, M and E, and you'll hear people talk about M and E, M and E. And a lot of times we think that that's just one thing. Measurement evaluation is just one word that's interchangeable, when in effect, it's actually two different words that both work hand in hand to accomplish different things that then allow us to move forward in evaluating our programs as a whole. So the first framework that we use to incorporate data and evidence to evaluate our performance is the measurement side. And then the second is evaluation. And although they can be interchangeable, they actually are distinctive approaches that have different objectives as a part of the process. So we're going to start today by understanding measurement, which shouldn't be too difficult. I'm sure you all already probably know what this means. But essentially, measurement tells us what a program did and how well it did it. And it's quantitative, as you might suspect. Okay, so measurement tells us what a program did and how well it did it. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I'm going to choose an example here that we're going to follow through the rest of our time together that allows us to apply some of this information in kind of a realistic way. And you all, of course, I would hope are thinking about your own ministry efforts as well and how this might be utilized within the work that you do or within the work that some of our ministry partners do that we're connected with. So our example in this case is going to be a nonprofit ministry called Nets for All. It's a really clever name that I came up with. And they provide mosquito nets for families that are living in the slum areas of Eastern Africa. So we have this new ministry partner, Nets for All, and they want to know how they can start to incorporate measurement and evaluation into what they do. So we're looking at measurement today. And so when we're considering where to start, we're going to look at inputs into our programs. And again, if you ever apply for a grant, they will often ask you to be able to list your inputs. Or if you conduct a theory of change in the future, that's another element. So the word input just basically means anything that we are putting into our programs to make them work. So for Nets for All, their inputs are going to be mosquito nets, their staff, any volunteers that they use, transportation maybe for distribution, and then time that they spend doing their work. There could be a lot of different inputs here. This is just 5 that I came up with off the top of my head that we want to measure. Again, the sky's the limit on inputs. Then we're going to look at outputs. And this is the result of the input. So if we put things into our programs consistently, what is going to come out of that program as a result? So for Nets for All, the outputs are going to look like the number of individuals that end up having a mosquito net, ideally that didn't have one before, the percentage of malaria reduction in the area as a result of their programs, and the number of volunteers that are engaged. So these are the things we want to measure, both inputs and outputs for Nets for All. I'm going to pause there and ask you all to think about your own ministries and what might some of the inputs be for the programs. I mean, you have to start with programs. So I guess first identify what programs are a part of your ministry. And then what are some of the inputs for one of those programs? And then the outputs that you would see as a result.
So just thinking of our partner care team here, the staff is a big input, and we also have volunteers. We have a retired pastor that helps sell non-cash items like coins and stamps, but also he does all the nonprofit filings for state and federal filings when people want to form a new nonprofit. So that's on top of all of you guys who are part of our partner care team, Joe and Aaron and Becca and stuff. So I think that's a big value to what we bring in our inputs is our team with all of their unique skill set.
Awesome. That's great, Jonathan. Thank you. Anybody else have a program with some inputs related?
Yeah, I'd love to share. We have different projects, but one of the ones that come to my mind right away is the after-school tutoring program that try to reach out kids that come from deep communities in the mountains, move with their families to the city of Cusco, bringing their products. So a lot of them are very behind school because when they are living in the remote villages, they have probably school once a week or once every week. So when they get to the city, they're very behind. That's why we started this program. So this program, the inputs that we put into these programs are definitely staff. We have volunteers. We have the facility of the church that allow us to have that, all the school materials. And the outputs of, I guess, this program so far I've seen like about 80 to 85% of the kids that we're working with will end up finishing school, finishing elementary school and high school. And we're hoping to increase that little. Ultimately the goal of this program is not only just to share the gospel and engage with their families, but also just to give the opportunity to finish school and to provide whatever they need. So they will look forward to hopefully getting into college. So eventually they can break the poverty cycle. It's a long-term project. Yeah.
Awesome. Pepe, you are already jumping far ahead. You've got some impacts happening here with in addition to your inputs and your outputs, which is awesome to hear that you all are thinking that far ahead in your programs and what you're ultimately hoping to achieve with them. So along with those inputs, I think the direct result of that after school program are probably the number of students that you're serving, right? And then you mentioned the number of those that go on to graduate that might not have otherwise. And then you have your staff and your staff hours and your volunteers and your volunteer hours. So those are great examples. Thank you. Jeremiah, anything you'd like to add here for yourself?
Yeah, I'm kind of just thinking about our partner care team too, just how our inputs, I guess, would just be time talking with different ministry partners, trying to encourage and help in all those different ways. I guess my question with that, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but maybe some of those like little more intangible things that are investing in relationships and people. How would you measure that, or are you just, the time itself is part of that input? Yeah, and then how do you define outputs then when you're kind of dealing more with whether it's counseling, member care, any of those kind of maybe consulting type things versus something that has a direct product or whatnot? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. You're right. There are a number of intangible things that are of high value in the ministry work that we do that can be very difficult to put a number or attach a number to or to measure. And some that honestly, I don't know that ethically if we really should be trying to measure some of them, because it's not up to us. We can't measure in ministry, particularly, like we can't measure heart change, that's really up to the Lord. So when it comes to inputs and outputs, really, we're kind of keeping it in the realm of subjectivity, or sorry, not subjectivity, objectivity, and kind of putting our finger on things we really can quantify. When we get towards the evaluation side here in a day or two, we can look at some of those kind of internal progress reports that people might be able to self-report that would occur as a result of the efforts that we are putting into those relationships. So, for example, and I'm just going to do a little spoiler here that maybe will help put this into reference. If we say that our input as part of the partner care team, our input is the amount of time and the amount of coaches that we have available meeting with partners, so we have X amount of coaches, they spend X amount of time providing meetings, or maybe they do tangible things like building newsletters or helping with proposals or helping with fundraising strategy or events. Then we could kind of put each of those separately in as inputs, the different services that we're offering through our partner care team, right? And then our outputs really are those quantifiable. If Jonathan helped 10 partners this last year with fundraising events, that would be that would be an output, right? And then Jeremiah had X number of coaching classes on cultural intelligence. That's an output. Now, if we want to actually look at the impact of those things, that is going to relate more to the evaluation side, which we'll get to. But what we might be able to do when we're designing kind of our evaluation system with our partner care members is to start off by asking them at the beginning of one of these interactions with, say, you, Jeremiah, in a cultural intelligence class, how would you rate your current understanding of cultural intelligence on a scale of 1 to 10? Or maybe you list the different cultural values that are a part of that course, and you say, what is your understanding of each of these cultural values on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10? And you measure that at the start of the class. And then you give them a survey at the end of the class that's going to ask them to evaluate their understanding after the class, and then see what kind of growth has been achieved. And that's how we can engage in some of those less tangible forms of measurement around kind of impact and evaluate whether we're having the impact that we would like to have.
No, that's great. Not really. Yeah.
Thanks for asking that.
What I often do when I'm asked by a donor, or even like I'm at a fundraiser event and we're talking about measurement, I like to, like at a fundraiser, at like a banquet, we'll have like an infograph on the screen with the numbers of meals served and the number of jobs given or whatever the ministry is, and then why that's on the screen. Myself or whoever who's sharing or speaking is then just telling stories of the stories of the one last sheep and how their life was impacted. And so then you're meeting. I feel like you can break people down into two groups. They're either numbers people or they're stories people, and they want to hear that maybe that hard emotional or life transformational story of that one. And so that meets both of those needs.
Absolutely. That's an awesome approach, Jonathan. I love that. You're right. Like the head and the heart are so critical to communicating with our potential funders and helping them to be motivated to join in the important work that we're trying to do in the world along with Jesus. So, okay, back to the bare bones of measurement. Measurement is ultimately just counting. So we're all probably already doing this in some fashion, whether we have a record of it or we have it in a spreadsheet or we just have it in our head, or we can go back and look at our calendar and see how many events we participated in or how many meetings we had. It's really just counting and gathering that data. So in the Nets for All scenario, a measurement effort would tell us how many nets were distributed to how many people and how many volunteers participated in the distribution for how many hours and how many different areas of the community were impacted, right? I think the most critical part is really just establishing a system for how are we counting and how are we doing it consistently and how often are we doing it? I often will just put a note in my phone if I held an event, participated in an event or something of that effect, and I'll write down while I'm there how many people participated, along with any quotes that I hear from participants at that event, and just try to keep a record of that. And then later I'll transfer that into a spreadsheet that I have. If you keep Google Docs or Google Sheets apps on your phone, that's another way to really kind of track data in real time. Or you can be like me, and at the end of the year, when I'm supposed to turn in my mileage log for taxes, I go back and look at my calendar and do it all at once based on what I wrote down in my calendar for the year. And it takes a long time.
Too.
Okay, great. I'm not alone.
It's the best way to do it.
Whatever system you all have, as long as you're doing it and you're doing it accurately and you're doing it in a way that works for you, but it can help to be proactive in the sense that you've actually set up those spreadsheets in advance that at least have the headings of what it is that you want to be tracking, that you want to be counting, because it's a lot easier to do it in real time and to do it consistently than to try to go back and look through a whole year and try to remember how many kids participated in that after school program every week for a year, So benefits to having a strong measurement system for your organization. What would you all see as being a benefit to you personally if you were to have kind of a consistent system in place to track different components of your ministry work?
I think if you're doing it more regularly and ongoing and have a system, it just becomes easier to implement new things based on what works and have quicker growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
Can definitely help us just to show the donors or sponsors the impact of the work that they are involved with.
Absolutely.
I'm even thinking for myself and towards the different ministry partners that I've worked with that get discouraged at times of kind of, man, what are we even doing? What's getting accomplished here? What's the point of all this? Just being able to have a record of what they've done can probably be really encouraging to see, hey, we are making steps forward. We are actually doing something, or if they're not, then at least being aware of it and being able to measure that, I think is great.
Yeah, I love that perspective, Jeremiah. I think you're right. It does provide an impetus for both encouragement and kind of accountability as it's needed. I know even for myself, I keep a time record that kind of shows how many hours I'm spending here and there with whom. And I can look at that on a monthly basis and see where, maybe I haven't put forth as much effort as something is needed in order to flourish. And as a result of tracking that, I can go back and say, well, I'm going to spend the last week of the month focusing on that because I know that I haven't spent as much time there as is necessary for that area to grow. So some benefits to measuring here. Measuring provides quantitative data to communicate to your supporters, as Pepe was saying. And it allows us, if we're doing it regularly, it allows us to have kind of some ready information to continue to plump up our marketing efforts, to post consistently in our newsletters, in our social media, in our communications where we're sitting down and having coffee with people. It helps us to really have data that's easy to access when we're doing this consistently, that we can keep a fresh perspective in front of our partners and our supporters. It also demonstrates to ourselves and to those supporters the tangible work and use of their funds. Again, we don't have to wait until a year-end report or, a grant-making organization has a deadline to be able to share how we're using donor dollars effectively. This could be something that really benefits us to do consistently throughout the year. And I think it actually helps to build a case when we say, we had a contributor give this, and this is what that enabled us to do as a result of their generosity. Would you consider being the person who funds this next initiative that we have going on in the upcoming quarter? When people see that we're regularly using funds to accomplish really important things, it encourages them to want to jump on that bandwagon and join in with the work that we're doing and to help be a part of generously funding that work. And then when done effectively, measurement quantifies our use of inputs and resources, the time, money, material, and goods, in a way that allows us to determine the cost of providing those services. Does that make sense? So it's like if I'm providing 500 mosquito nets and it costs me $3,000 to do that, then I know that, each mosquito net is costing, what is that, $60 or is that $6? I'm so bad at math, you guys. I think it's $6. No, it's 6 times. Someone do that. Anyway, you can delete this section of the video, Jonathan. So anyway, it can help us to determine the cost of providing each of the services that we provide. And then that allows us, again, to communicate really in a compelling way how people can join in those efforts and what, a gift of $150 is going to allow us to do X, Y, and Z. And we're able to communicate that story really effectively when we're engaging in good measurement techniques. Okay, so when we have a good understanding of the costs of providing our individual services, it makes fundraising, I think, a lot easier to engage in. It allows us to tell a really consistent and compelling story. Okay, I think that's actually where we're going to stop for today. And then next week, we're going to jump into how we can engage in some measurement techniques in really simple ways. And in order for us to talk about that kind of in a way that benefits each of our organizations individually, I want you all to be thinking through in advance, and I'll ask you this next week, what are some indicators or what are some different elements of what it is that you do as your ministry that you would want to be sure that you are measuring? And then how does it help you to have that information? How would you use that information once you have it? Okay, so we're going to start off our conversation next week with that topic.
Great. I love it.
Great.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank
you very much.
You bet. My pleasure. Okay, we'll see you guys next time.
All right.